Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to explain about Amazon Web Service Dynamo database and how to create a tables in Dynamo database and create items in the tables. Amazon DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL database service that provides fast and predictable performance with a seamless scalability. With DynamoDB we can create a tables that we can store and retrieve any amount of data and serve any level of request traffic. It supports basic CRUD operation and conditional operations as well. Each DynamoDB query is executed by a primary key identified by the user which uniquely identifies each item. Let's go ahead and log in into Amazon Web Service. We successfully logged in. First click on the services and search for DynamoDB. Click on the DynamoDB. Before moving on, we should know the core components of DynamoDB. Tables, items and attributes are the core components that we work with. A table is a collection of items and each item is a collection of attributes, and it uses a primary key to uniquely identify each item in a table. Let's go ahead and create a table first. Before creating a table, I want to show you information about the table that I'm going to create. So click on the text editor. So my table name is employee and the primary key is employee ID. So as I told, table is a collection of items. So this is the one item and this is the one item. So each item represents one JSON document, and as I told, item is a collection of attributes. This is the one attribute, this is the another attribute, this is another attribute. So these are the root attributes, and these root attributes have a sub attributes as well. And each item has a one primary key. So in this item, employee ID is a primary key, and in this item employee ID is a primary key. So but if you look at the values of this primary key, it has a 101 and it has 102. So copy that table name and go back to AWS, paste here, and it is asking the primary key as well. Copy the primary key, paste here. We should provide the type of the primary key, whether it's a string or number or binary. So I'm going with the string type. Come down and click on the create. Employee table has been created. So it's time to create items in employee table. So click on the items and click on the create item. So it is displaying the primary key first, and is the type of the primary key attribute is a string type. So we have to provide the value to this employee ID attribute. So 101 I'm going to provide, and go back to your text editor, and another attribute is employee name. Click on the plus and click on the append. And what is the type of employee name? Employee name type is string type. So click on the string, paste here and give the value to attribute ename1, and again go back, copy the another attribute employee age, click on the plus, append, and it is a number type. Click on the number, paste here and give the 24, and go back to text editor again. If you look at this employee bank accounts attribute, it's not a number type, it's not a string type, it is an array type. So how to create an array? And this array has a element. This element is a type of an object, each object having different attributes. So how to create a array? So go back to AWS, and first we will make sure whether our data is properly formatted or not. Click on the text. So it has employee ID, employee name and employee age. We need to create another root attribute. So go back to tree and click on the plus click on the append. So to create an array, we should use a list. Currently the list is here it is an array type. It has a 0 elements. So click on the text again. Okay, it's not saved. Click on the tree again. Again click the plus, append, click on the list, and so we have to provide the field name. So field name is bank accounts. Paste here and click outside. Go back and select the text again. So employee bank accounts, it is an array type. So we have to provide the elements to this array. Go back to tree. How to provide the elements to the array? So that each element is an object literal. Click on the arrow, and currently it is an empty array. So we have to provide the elements. Click on the plus and append. To provide the elements in the array, we should use a map. So this map currently don't have any element, attributes. So we have to provide the attributes to this element. So what are those attributes? Bank number. First copy and click on the plus, append. It is a number type. Select number and give the value to that attribute. Again bank name. Click on the plus, append, and bank name is a string type. Paste here and give the value to that attribute. Be name 1, and one more attribute, current balance. Copy and click on the plus, append, and number type. Paste and give $1000. So click on the outside. Go back and select the text. Array, it has one element. So this is an object literal, and it has a 3 attributes. So we have to create another element. Go back and select the tree. Click on the arrow. So currently we have only one element at 0th index. So I'm going to create another element. Click on the plus and append. Click on the map again. Okay. So element at 0th index having 3 attributes. Element at first index having no attributes. So I'm going to provide the attributes to the element present at first index. So copy the same attributes, account number, and click on the plus, append, and account number is a number type, or otherwise click this arrow. Account number is a number type. Paste and give the account number is 502, and again click on the plus, append. Bank name is a string type. So copy, paste, and give the value to that attribute. Be name 2, and copy the current balance and give another attribute. It's a number type. Paste here 1001. Okay, so go back to text, and if you look at this JSON document, it has a 4 root attributes: employee ID, employee name, employee age, employee bank accounts. Out of 4, employee ID is a primary key. So employee bank accounts is again type of the array. It has a sub elements. So each element represents a one object literal. So it has a again attributes: account number, bank name, and the current balance. Okay, so go back and again select the tree. Click on the save. So one item has been created. So employee ID is a primary key, employee age, employee bank account details, and employee name. So we'll create another item. First we'll click on this item and click on the text. First copy and close this window and click on the create another item. So click on the text again and delete everything and paste here. So employee ID is 1 or 2. So why I'm going to change is because this is a primary key, it's not allow the duplicates. So employee name, change it to employee 2, and this is the 4, and just use the same, and this is the 3, and just change it to 25 and click on the save again. So second item also created. So first item primary key value is 1 at 1, and second item primary key value is 1 at 2. So if you look at the difference between the here, there is no difference. So both item having the same root attributes: employee ID, employee age, employee bank account details, and the employee name. So I'm going to modify second item. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another attribute in the second item. Click on the plus and append and select the string. So I'm going to provide employee M status, marital status, and the value is M. Okay, and click on the save. So if you look at the difference between the item 1 and the item 2, item 1 has a 4 root attributes, whereas item 2 has 5 root attributes. So from this we can understood that it is not a mandatory every item should have same number of attributes, and the attribute names should not be the same. So this is how you have to create a table and the items in the tables. Once you successfully logged in into AWS, first click on the services and search for Lambda. So click on the Lambda. So click on the create a function. So it is asking us to select the blueprint. So actually these blueprints are the sample configuration for event sources and the Lambda functions. So I'm going with the default blueprint, that is nothing but hello world. So click on this hello world blueprint and click on the next, and just give the name of our AWS Lambda function. So name of our AWS Lambda function is myemp, and description whatever you want, you can provide the description, and I'm going with the default description, and select the runtime. So default is a Node.js. If you want, you can go with Java or the Python. So I'm going with Node.js as my runtime to run a Lambda function. Okay, so this is a simple code. So you don't want bother about this code. Come down and Lambda function handler and the role. So here we have to provide the what is the exact input to your Lambda functions. Okay, so where your Lambda functions is running, we have to provide that information in the handlers. So by default, this handlers like index.handler is nothing but there is a handler function which is available in index.js. So that is nothing but this index.handler represents that. So inside the index.js there is a handler function. So if you want to go with this default JS and the functions, you can go, or otherwise if you don't want to go, just provide your own JS file and the functions. So I'm going with my own JS files and the functions. So emp is my JS file name, and inside this emp JS file I'm going to have one function, get items. Okay, so next a role. So what this role defines? So this role defines the permissions of your functions. So what permissions you have means this Lambda functions has. So I'm going to create a new role, so that actually that roles defines this Lambda functions have permissions to access my DynamoDB or to access my RDS. So let's go ahead and create a new role. So already some existing roles are already available, so I don't want to use these roles. I'll go ahead and create a new role for my Lambda functions. So open a new tab and here click on the services and search for IAM role. So click on this IAM. So click on the roles. So these are the roles that I have already created, so I don't want to reuse these roles, so I will go ahead and create a new role. So click on the create a new role button, and Amazon EC2, I don't want to use Amazon EC2, just come down. So AWS Lambda, just select this. So we have to attach a policy. What this policy tells, so this policy tells you are going to access what. So as a Lambda functions, I'm going to access my Dynamo database. Okay, inside the database, what tables you are going to access. Okay, so those informations this policy holds. So what is the table name and what permissions you have? You have only read only permissions or write only permissions, or you have permissions to only create a table, or you have a permissions to get the items only, or you have permissions to update the items that are available in DynamoDB table. So those informations this policy holds. So I'm going with a default policy. So that policy is Amazon, like search for Dynamo. So Amazon DynamoDB full access means, so I'm going to give the permissions to my Lambda function to access anything you want, you can do. So the type of access I'm going to provide to my Lambda functions. So select this and click on the next step. So give the role name. Okay, my EMP ACC is my role name. Just click on the create role finally. So my EMP ACC role has been created. Just go back to your Lambda function and search for your role. So click on the choose existing role again and come down. So it is not populating here, so because of like sometimes it may not populate. So what you do is you have to refresh your page. So after refreshing, I am selecting the existing role and my EMP access now it's populating in the drop down. So select this and click on the next, and this is a verification page, and my Lambda function name is my EMP, and this is a description, and Node.js is my runtime, and this emp.getItems is the handlers, and my EMP access is the role. And so these are the advanced settings. You no need to worry about these settings, just go with all these default values, and finally click on the create a function. So your Lambda function has been successfully created and the function name is my EMP. So let's go ahead and try to execute your function, I mean test your function. So click on the text. So this is the input event, I mean input test event. So we have to provide some inputs to your Lambda functions. So that's why it is asking us to provide your inputs to your event. So I'm going with the default values. So click on the save and test. So actually it is failing. Why? Because, so first click on this details. So handler get items missing on module EMP. So what is our module name? Our module name is a EMP, and get items is actually a our function name, right? So copy this get items and come down, and here exports dot handler. This handler is actually a function, but you have defined get items, so that get items function is not available in a emp.js file. Okay, just replace this handler.js by get items, then save it and click on the test again. So click on the details. So we are getting the value 1, and value 1 equal to value 1, value 2, value 3. So come down. So callback null event 1 dot key 1, it returns the value 1. So our Lambda function is working fine. Now we have to make a changes in our code to work, I mean to get the items that are available in a DynamoDB tables. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Amazon Web Service software development kit, that is nothing but AWS SDK, to get actually a DynamoDB instance and the client of DynamoDB. So let's go ahead and do the code, where AWS equal to, so AWS SDK request here, so use a require command. What you want to require? AWS SDK. Okay, so from AWS SDK, first we have to get the DynamoDB, and from the DynamoDB instance you have to get the client of DynamoDB. So how to get? Using new AWS dot DynamoDB. So I'm getting the DynamoDB instance, and from that get the client, document client. That's it. Then assign it to a variable where dClient equal to. Okay, now we are getting the document client. So now what we have to do is, using this client, we have to send a request to your DynamoDB by passing the table name and primary key of your table name. Okay, so exports.getItems. So I don't want to use this exports here itself, where get items. Okay, it's better to remove this code, and we'll do the code freshly. Okay, now where our function name is get items, right? Get items equal to, so using the arrow function, it has a 3 parameters. One is a event and context, another one is a callback. Okay, now this is the arrow function syntax. From in this function, so using the document client, I means Amazon DB document client, we have to send a request to DynamoDB tables. So how? dClient dot, so to get the items we should use the get function on document client. So docClient dot get input. So input, actually this is a variable, so it holds information about your table. What is your table name and what is the primary key of your table name? Okay, and the second parameter is a callback function. Okay, so it has 2 parameters. One is the error and the data. Okay, so if any error occurs, then use the callback to send the error data. Okay, and the null, and just give the user defined message, error occurred. So else, again callback function and null comma data. So we have provided almost all the information that's required for getting the items that are available in our DynamoDB. So one pending thing here is we don't know. So just if you look at this error, input is not defined. So actually this this function don't know what is this input. So we have to tell what is this input. So create a variable input. As I told, this input holds information about your table. So it is an object literal, and it has 2 attributes. One is a table name, and my table name is EMP, and another attribute name is key. It is again a object literal. So key is a combination of one or more the attributes. So in my EEMP table, I'm maintaining only one column as my primary key. So what is that primary key? ID is my primary key, and just give the value. So my table name is the EMP, and the key is a combination of multiple columns. So I have only one column as my primary key, that is nothing but the ID, and currently it has a one value 1 or 2. So just to go back to your new tab and search for DynamoDB. So click on this DynamoDB. So click on the tables. It has a EEMP table, and click on this items and click on this item, and see, if you look at this ID is the number 1 or 2. This is actually the primary key. Okay, so just go back to your Lambda function and save this and test it. So our execution result failed. Just expand this. So handler get items missing on module EMP. So actually we have created a function, but we forget to export that function. Just go back to your code and using the exports command, exports dot get items equal to get items. So it's better to copy this. Copy exports dot get items and get items. Okay, and click on the save and test. So execution result success. Click on these details. How? So we are getting the details, I mean items that are available in a DynamoDB tables. So with ID 1 or 2, address is this one, and name is Ashok, and pin code is something. So let's go ahead and change the ID value. Just use it to 101, and again click on the save and test. So expand these details. Okay, even for this ID also we are getting the items. So name is this one and the ID 101. So actually if you look at the code, we are hard coding this input values, right? So actually we should not hard code these values here. So instead of keeping this input data here, so let me copy this, Control X. Okay, so I have to get this input details from my event dot input. So instead of using input, just use the params. So where this actual input is coming, so this input details, these events are coming actually from this client. So actually we don't have any client to test this one, so I'm going to provide this event inside actions configure test event. Okay, so just remove entire this and copy this and means paste this. Okay, and this is actually a params. That's it. So put it in double quotes, and as well as all this table name as well, and key as well. Okay, let's go ahead and click on the save and test. So click on these details, how we are getting the items details. So let's go ahead again, change the value of ID to 1 or 2 here, and again click on the save and test and expand these details, how we are getting the details. So this is how you have to get the items that are available in a DynamoDB tables using the Lambda functions. So from the Postman, how to call this API gateway, and this API gateway in turn calls the Lambda functions, and this Lambda function in turn calls the DynamoDB. So we will send the request from the Postman, and this DynamoDB will process the request and send the list of items based on the query that we sent from a Postman. In part 2, I have already explained how to create a Lambda functions and call the DynamoDB. So we'll pass some request and the DynamoDB will process the request and send the list of items. So we'll make sure that our Lambda function is able to fetch the items from the DynamoDB. So this is the DynamoDB, and this is a table I have. So EEMP is a table. It has a 2 items, 101 and 102. So these 2 are the primary keys. So let's go ahead and check the Lambda functions. So in the Lambda functions, I'm using the EEMP table and I'm getting the primary key value from my event. So where I'm passing the events, just click on these qualifiers. So click on the actions and click on the configure test events. So here I'm passing ID colon 101. So let me change it to 102 and click on the save and test button. So click on the details. So successfully we are getting the details from the DynamoDB. So we will make sure these details are available in the DynamoDB. So click on 102 item. So pin code, name, ID and address. So pin code, name, ID and address. So these are the attributes that are available in items. So we'll go ahead and create a API gateway. So AWS services and search for API gateway. So click on the API gateway. Currently I have 2 APIs. So I don't want to reuse these 2 APIs. I will create a new API. So click on the create API button. So it is giving the 4 options. You are creating a new API. Okay. So if you want to create a new API, just click this radio button or clone from the existing API or create a API from the existing Swaggers or example API. So I'm going with the new API. So we have to provide the API name. My API name is my EMP API. Okay. So description is get list of items from DynamoDB. And finally click on the create API. So we have successfully created a API, my EMP API. Now what we have to create? So we have created a API. So that API should have some resources. So that each resource should have some methods. So it's like a REST API. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a resource first. So click on the actions and click create resource. So it is asking the resource name, my EMP resource. Okay. So resource path is automatically taking the default resource name. So enable API gateway course. So you don't need to worry about these things. So if you want to include this path params, you can include this using these brackets. Okay. So I don't want to include this path params in my URL. So I'm clicking the create resource. So my resource has been created. Now I'm going to have a methods in my resource. So click on the actions and click on the create method. So what is the type of that method? Whether you are going to fetch the documents or you are going to update or insert the documents. So my requirement is I have to fetch the documents that are available in a DynamoDB. So I'm using a get method. Click the get and check this. So now it is a critical part here. So it is asking the integration type. So you are going to integrate your API with what? With Lambda functions, with HTTP or with MAC or with AWS services. So currently I am not going to use this HTTP, MAC and AWS services. I am going to integrate my API with my Lambda functions. Okay. So by default it is checked radio button Lambda functions. Okay. So give the Lambda region. So I'm giving US East 2. So why I have selected US East 2 is in this region only I have created my Lambda functions. Okay, what is my Lambda functions? Name. So click on this Lambda management and my Lambda function is my EMP. okay, and type that name. My EMP is automatically populated here. So click on this and finally click the save. Okay, click on the OK. So my API has been created with the resource and the methods. Now it's time to do some additional stuff to make it work. So first thing is a method request. So this method should contain some what. So whether it should process any query params or the path params or some other additional stuff. So I'm going to pass ID as a ID as a query param, and based on that ID value, this DynamoDB will return the corresponding item. So how to add this query param to your method request? So click on this method request and URL query string parameters. So click on this. So it is asking the add query string. Okay, click on that and give the query string as ID. Okay, so click on this. So it has been added. So you don't need to do anything. So request body and HTTP request headers. So come back, and so we have given the required details in the method request. So we have given only the query params only. Now we will move on to integration request. So what is this integration request is? So integration request is nothing but you are getting some data from the client, and this API gateway will receive that request and get that data and set it to the event that we should pass it to a Lambda functions. I means we are getting the request and process that request, and we will convert that request which is same as a request to your Lambda functions. Okay, so I will explain how to get the data from the request and constructs a JSON objects which is required for Lambda functions. So go back to your Lambda function and click on the actions and configure a test event. So this Lambda function is expecting this JSON structure. So it should have only a one attribute, that is nothing but a ID, and it has a value. So we need to send this JSON request from a API gateway. So let's go ahead and copy this and go back to API gateway and click on the integration request. Okay, so integration type, all our details we have already given, and finally come down, click on the body mapping templates. So select the second radii button when there is no template defined. So I'm not going to define any templates, so that's why I'm selecting second, and add a mapping template. So application or JSON, what type of template you need? So content type, so we have to select application or JSON. Because of that format only a request will construct at which is required for your Lambda functions. So let me type application or JSON. So click on this. Okay, so come down and paste that. Okay, so I should not hardcode this value. I should get this value from the API, from my resource. Okay, so how to get? So we have a small syntax to get the value from the params. So dollar symbol input dot. So from input I'm getting all the params, and out of those params I need only a ID param value. That's it. That's very simple. So there is a query params or the path params are available. From those params I'm getting only a ID param value from my input. So I'm setting it to ID attribute value. Okay, so just click on the save. Why I have given only a ID? Why I have not given my employee ID? Because of I have already given this ID as a query param. So that's why I am giving the same name. Okay, so finally click on the save. So we have saved this a template, and come back to method execution And so we have done method request and integration request. You no need to worry about this integration response and method response. Okay, so click on the test here. Okay, so it is asking the id value, query string. It's not a path param, it is a query string. Okay, so I'm giving the 1 or 2. Okay, come down and click on the test, means you are testing your API. This API interns calls the Lambda functions by passing the id value as a 1 or 2, and this Lambda functions interns calls the DynamoDB, so it will process the request. So because of this id value is 1 or 2, so it will give the corresponding item to your user. So click on the test. So we are getting the actual details which are available in a DynamoDB. So this is the item which is matched to 1 or 2. So let me change it to 1 or 1 and click on the test. So I'm getting a ID and the name values. Okay. So now our API is working perfect. It's time to call this API gateway from a Postman. How to call the API gateway from the Postman? So if you want to call this API gateway from the outside of your AWS, this API should be deployed in some stages, like as a test environment or the prod environment. Then only you can call this API gateway from outside of AWS. So first we have to deploy our API in any environment. So click on this actions and deploy API. Okay, it is asking deployment stage. So I'm selecting the new stage and stage name. For example, it is a testing stage. Okay, and stage description, test my API. Okay, and deployment description, I am not providing any description. So click on a deploy. So this is the URL. You should use this URL if you want to invoke this my EMP API from outside of AWS gateway. So I'm not going to use this API directly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to generate one JSON file and import the JSON file from the Postman. Okay, instead of copying this API and paste it in a Postman directly. So I'm clicking the export button and click on this Postman and click on this JSON. So one file has been downloaded, this my EMP API test some JSON file. Okay, now I'm moving back to Postman and click on the import a file, choose file. So it's a download section and my EMP API test Swagger. So double click this and collection my EMP API imported. So my EMP API has been imported. Click on this my EMP resource, click on this and click on this method. Why? Because this is the API, it is your resource and it is your method. So this is the get method. Click on this. See, this is your resource and my EMP resource and question mark ID. So this is the query string, right? So let me pass 1 or 2 here. Okay, and click on the send. How I'm getting the results successfully. So let me cross verify. Let me change it to ID value as 1 or 1 and click on the send again. So I'm getting the exact items that are matches with the ID. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add the one attribute to any item. Okay, so DynamoDB and click on this plus and append string, pin code, address and street. Okay, so street 1. Okay, and click on the save. Okay, and go back to Postman and instead of 1 or 1 send it to 1 or 2 and click on the send. So street 1. So this from the Postman we can able to call this API gateway, and the API internally calls the Lambda functions, and Lambda function is responsible for sending the request to DynamoDB and get the matched item with the ID. So this is how you have to call the API from the Postman, and this is how you have to integrate your API with the Lambda functions. Thank you, and thanks for watching this video.